Alrighty, question 29, boys, is how can anxiety and arousal affect the performance of an athlete? And this was worth 5 marks. And again, I've gone and bolded the red key parts for yourself here. So you need to talk obviously about anxiety and then about arousal and how they impact on the performance of an athlete. You know, this can be done through examples or even just mentioning how they could impact on the performance, which would technically be an example anyway. So anxiety and arousal is our dot point up the top here. If we look across to the right-hand side, you know, and this is the Learn 2, it says here, explain the difference between anxiety and arousal in terms of the effect on performance. That's very similar to how can anxiety and arousal affect the performance of an athlete. Very close to our question. Right, so there it is there. So anxiety and arousal, and these are some of the areas that could have been mentioned, but the main part I was looking for was the difference between these two, anxiety and arousal. And I know some boys went through trait and state, which is very good. We'll have a look at a sample now. So this student goes through and he talks about, first of all, he says trait anxiety and then state anxiety. Now, what you need to remember for this question is that I found that students were confusing trait and state, and they needed to make sure they had a clear understanding of both. Remember, his trait, and it's exactly what the student's written here, is the fear an athlete may perceive in a certain situation. For example, in a basketball game, player A is good at free throws, whereas player B dislikes free throws. He begins to think the crowd is watching him and fails under the pressure. This may cause him to miss the free throws. So that's how it's going to impact on his performance. His trait anxiety. Shaquille O'Neal was an example that boys used throughout their answer a fair bit, which is great from class. Again, he didn't like the basketball free throws, so his trait anxiety would be that he would perceive that situation as threatening and he wouldn't like to do it. Then we progress on to state anxiety, whereas the state anxiety is the body's physical responses to that situation that you've been presented in. So Shaquille O'Neal goes for a shot, he gets fouled, he knows he's going to the free throw line. All of a sudden he starts to tense up a little bit, he gets very nervous, he might start sweating, his breathing rate might increase, his heart rate might increase because he doesn't like to do free throws, but he knows he's got to do it. Whereas another player, let's say Michael Jordan, he may have no issues in free throws, so his body doesn't get worried at all. He doesn't get concerned. His breathing rate stays relaxed. He gets up and he can quite easily do his free throws. His state anxiety is a whole lot lower than what Shaquille O'Neal's would be. So the trait is how you perceive the situation. The state anxiety is what sort of problems you go through or your body's response to that situation. And that's what the student goes and talks through about here, which impacts on their performance. And then the next one he breaks off into is the arousal. So he talks about being under-aroused. The player is unmotivated, and when it comes to performance, such as a rugby league, they'll begin to miss tackles or not make plays. If a player is over-aroused, it means that they are excited and therefore likely to make mistakes, such as losing the ball or even missing tackles. If the player is in the zone of optimal arousal, their performance will be at the best, and errors are unlikely to occur. So that's what we're looking at. Again, boys, I'm really excited by the underlining. So again, you can see trait anxiety, state anxiety, under-aroused, over-aroused, optimal arousal. That's what it's after. It makes it a lot easier to see what your response is and where we're going from. So some of the feedback from some of our answers ourselves, boys, was that, again, I've spoke about already anxiety and arousal and what they were about. I've then broken it up into state and trait and state anxiety. And boys were a bit ordinary, I thought, in their understanding of those areas. You needed to have some examples for all areas, showing whether it be missing a free throw, missing a tackle, or dropping the ball. That's an example of what could happen in that situation. The other part too is, when looking at this question, how can anxiety and arousal affect the performance of an athlete? A lot of boys try to stay on the negative side. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. Sure, Shaquille O'Neal could be negative about how he sees the state anxiety, gets very nervous, but it could also be someone who's quite positive. So don't always think your answer has to be down the line of being negative. In this case, you could quite easily talk about how it could impact on their performance in a positive way. Likewise, examples need to be given throughout. And people, again, confuse, as I said at the start, trait and state anxiety. But apart from that, most boys, I think, did okay in this answer. I wouldn't say it was great. I think boys did okay, but it's definitely having an understanding of trait and state with examples to go with it, which this student did. And then talking about arousal, whether it's under-aroused, over-aroused, and then even the optimal arousal.